doesn't matter who does it.
Sure. Welcome back. This is another episode of Gaming at the Round Table with Owl Knights Media. Today we have Joe, Crystal behind the scenes, and myself, Maverick, and we're going to hop right into it. So, in recent news, all the buzz this month has been around Helldivers 2 and some of the positive and the negative of their interaction with their fan base and what's been happening, especially in regards to a requirement for people to play Helldivers 2 to have a PlayStation subscription of some kind, PSN, I think specifically. So I've been following it on and off. It's been developing pretty rapidly over the last several days. And a major tweet just released. So I think what we can do is we can start with the most up-to-date piece of information, walk a little bit backwards, and then talk through how things progressed. So the most recent tweet from PlayStation or Sony says, Helldiver, this is May 6th. This came out at midnight, interestingly enough, 36 million views, and today is the same day. Helldivers fans, we've heard your feedback on the Helldivers 2 account linking update. The May 6th update, which would have required Steam and PlayStation Network account linking for new players and current players beginning May 30th, will not be moving forward. They have one more paragraph. We're still learning what is best for PC players, and your feedback has been invaluable. Thanks again for your continued support of Helldivers 2, and we'll keep you updated on future plans. Sounds benevolent. The reaction has been relatively positive, if not overwhelmingly positive, to that decision. But let's talk a little bit about what led up to that tweet.
I think
I'd like to take... Yeah, go ahead.
I think one of the bigger things, and when you mentioned it and said it the way that you just did, it reminded me that there are a few games that are cross-platform that required you have a linked account to something else.
Oh yeah.
Which when I originally put the post, say on like TikTok about the company doing what they did and how it got so negative so fast, it didn't really register in my head. But a lot of games actually do that. But I think it's the general public's response is more of they think that there's a fee attached to it, and they don't want to take the extra step if they don't have to. And
yeah, I agree with you, but there is an important catch, and that is that certain countries, to my understanding, there's been several pieces to the puzzle, right? The most significant piece that I've heard, I can't confirm if it's true, is that people who were able to buy the game, say on Steam, right? So they're on a computer, they buy Helldivers 2, but in their country, there's a limitation to where their internet or whatever prevents them from registering for a PlayStation account. So no matter even if they were like, yeah, cool, fine, let's do it, they can't. But they've bought this game that they can't play now. And so some of the reaction, the negative reaction was, dude, why are you selling things that can't be used? Right? Like you being Sony, and many people felt that the developers as well of Helldivers 2 equally, you guys are selling this game to people won't be able to continue to use it, or in some cases use it at all, even upon purchase. And so you can imagine what kind of negativity would come from that. Because I want, sorry to interrupt there. It's just like that was a huge
Crystal
piece.
Just said it in the chat saying that Apex does it, which was the first company that came to my mind. Respawn, and then you have Fortnite that does it. And I believe Genshin does it as well, where you have to register your normal. Because I started playing Genshin on PlayStation, but when I did that, I had to register it through their I guess
Hoyoverse.
Their account. So I think that's pretty similar to the same thing, isn't it?
Very similar, except I don't know what limitations exist on time of purchase, right? So if you get Apex, or free games is hard to talk about, but let's choose a game that wasn't free. Let me think here. Destiny, I think when Destiny came out,
Yeah.
there was a requirement to register on their servers. I know for sure Blizzard had their what is ArenaNet, I think it is.
Yeah.
I might be thinking Guild Wars, but
Yeah,
wait, are
Guild
they owned
Wars
by
was
this?
reading that.
Right. So there are major games that cost money to purchase where you needed an account. But it's my understanding that most of those, I could be mistaken, don't get banned in certain countries where you could also buy the game, right? So I'm going to randomly say a country name just to have a talking point. I can't guarantee this applies. Let's just say you're in Australia. You buy Helldivers 2, you play it for a month or whatever, and then this PSN thing comes up, and for whatever reason, due to internet limitations, you can't register for PlayStation Network in Australia, and thus you can't play the game anymore that you paid full price for. Right? I think that's a stretch because I'm pretty sure Australia is not in that circumstance, but other people in other countries claim they are, and I believe them, just because there were so many similar reports. So, to what you're saying, though, I think a lot of people reacted negatively despite that, right? There's no way that everyone who said something negative and responded negatively was in that boat, right? There were definitely Americans for sure that were review bombing Helldivers 2 when this all came out. So I do think you and Crystal make a really good point that this isn't new, and even if you ignore the payment part, or especially if you ignore the payment part, not being able to play the game, signing up for an account is not that foreign. Totally agree.
Yeah, she just mentioned that 121 countries can't have a PSN. So
Okay.
that's massive. That's not like, hey, like a couple places can't get into this.
Yeah, I almost want to retract my prior statement just now. That is a huge deal. I'm not sure you can ignore that.
So I mean,
Holy
that could be like
smokes.
Americans just kind of trying to chime in and help out, but like that's significant. I didn't realize that they were banned so heavy.
So Crystal just posted an image, and I know the podcast listeners can't see it, but it's a colored map where you can see which countries that don't have the PSN. And it looks like the massive majority of Africa is colored in, parts of northern South America, that's a weird way to phrase it, parts of Central America, several parts of, I
Central
don't even
Europe.
know the region,
That's
you know,
Central Europe, I think.
the area between Russia and the rest of Europe, heavily colored in, and many of the island nations are colored in. And I can't
That's
tell, but
crazy.
it
Over
almost
by, is that Polynesia?
just north of
Yeah.
Australia has like half of it colored in. I don't even know what country that is. But yeah, it's not just a random spattering of like countries in the middle of the ocean, right? This is a huge part of of the continent across the sea, especially massive. Yeah. Okay. So that's a way bigger deal
Jeez,
than I thought it was.
that is,
It's really cool having Crystal in the background,
yeah, just pulling it up.
Googling while we're talking. So that's super neat that she can do that, and really fascinating to see that chart. Okay, so I retract my prior statement. It's not something you can just ignore. And America, I think, Joe, you just mentioned
Yeah.
this. Maybe a lot of Americans were like, this isn't right. And so they're participating. Don't get me wrong, I think we'd complain anyway.
Yeah, we have a tendency to do that. Just as a whole, I think the gaming community, and the favorite term of today is toxic. And I think
Yes.
it has a very, very toxic side that if there's something that just the right handful of people don't like, they just review bomb stuff like left and right. And I don't think it's always warranted, but I think sometimes it is. But I think it's a tool for the community that can be used in the right way. But again, I think when you use the term review bombing, it's in that negative, just you're doing it to do it, not necessarily that the game itself was actually bad.
Mm-hmm.
I think this was just an instance where, and we spoke about it for 2 seconds before we got on, was it the developer or the head developer that,
I think it was the CEO.
well, that's even bigger.
Pilestead, I believe, is what he goes by on Twitter, at least, or X.
What did he say directly? Because I knew
Yeah.
someone said something, but I didn't know what exactly.
So I believe at one point it's all hearsay, right? He let out a tweet saying, "Hey guys, if you're unhappy about it, we're unhappy about it. Nobody's happy about this. If you want to make a difference and you want Sony to listen, then why don't you just go review bomb Helldivers 2? Like, bomb us and make your voice heard." Now, again, this is all what I've heard and seen. Um, and so the community at large did exactly that. They just freaking bombed the reviews for Helldivers 2, and let alone all the social media posts and YouTube videos and all that stuff. But I'm pretty sure the Steam page right now, and I don't have
I can
Steam
give you the
pulled up.
numbers. So Crystal put this saying that Helldivers received roughly 84,000 negative reviews in one day. So that is one hell of a tool.
Especially when I think the total is only like 250,000 total.
Mm-hmm.
So getting 80,000 of those in a day,
Almost
all
85,
negative.
yeah.
Yeah, that's huge percentage. So we started this podcast mentioning that the most up-to-date tweet, right? The PlayStation on X, Twitter, said, okay, we're not going to do this. We're thinking about what the best course of action is, but rest assured, we're not doing it right now. Which interestingly isn't a promise to not do it. It's just saying, all right, let's talk about this.
I saw dollar
It's
signs
not a
going the opposite way, and we're like,
mm,
we're gonna think this out a little bit more.
yeah, and I think it's more than them worried about losing money, because the reality is they've made a massive amount of sales already, both the developers and Sony. I think it's more reputation restoration, or they really just don't want to get slammed permanently. So you mentioned Pilestead here just a moment ago. Let me read his in between tweet between, I think, when he was like, let's go review bomb, and PlayStation actually going, all right, guys, let's talk about this. So Pilestead, who I believe is the CEO, he's certainly an important person in the company. He got called out by another person on X, because that's what X users do. And they were like, why are you acting all blameless? And, I wish I had the exact prompt tweet, and I really want to find it, but let me read his response. He said, I do have a part to play. I am not blameless in all of this. It was my decision to disable account linking at launch so that players could play the game. I did not ensure players were aware of the requirement, and we didn't talk about it enough. Keyword enough, because they did mention it. We knew for about 6 months before launch that it would be mandatory for online PS titles. All right, so I have an unpopular opinion response to that. A lot of people I've seen online right now are talking about, well, the developers, they have their hands tied, and they did respond, and he took accountability. He even outright said, quote, I have a part to play. I am not blameless. And so they kind of like are saying, well, good on you, man. And in my head, just because someone tells you that they like,
he kind of bait and switched the community, knowing that was coming, because he said that 6 months prior he was aware of that, and then waits until the community literally just starts going at him, and he's like, well, then just do this.
I actually think not only did he know ahead of time, I think he knew how this was going to pan out, and he was gambling. He took a risk that panned out in his favor. I think I 100% believe, because if I were in his shoes, I might have considered doing it, where he was like, all right, if we release this game with this limitation, we're going to be out all of these extra people, all of this extra money, all of this extra PR, right? Maybe we can bully and like gather a following to get Sony to like relieve us a bit of our contractual obligation. Half a year before launch, that's not a bat of an eye. Like, that is, you've had many meetings about how do we tackle this, guys? This is a big problem. Our game's going to come out. What do we do about it? And their solution was basically act and ask for forgiveness after the fact. And so not only do I not think he's blameless, I think he is primarily to blame. I don't blame Sony. This is the unpopular opinion part. I don't blame Sony at all. They had a contract. You know, this is in a contract somewhere for sure. And the other party reneged on their end. Sony was like, all right, I'll be a little gracious. You have half a year, but eventually you have to pay the piper. We signed a contract. And 6 months later, they're like, oh, well, the internet's review bombing us. And like they're being forced into if you were to put the roles in reverse, right? You as a human being sign a contract with someone and they renege.
And he has it in writing saying to do it.
Right.
It's not like he's just like, oh, the community did it on their own.
This is what gamers want. It's like, yeah, okay, if you really truly felt that way and you wanted the change to happen, say that before the money's in your pocket. They've already made the money from all those sales, the developers, right? Like people are talking about Sony being a greedy company or wanting their mitts in any basket. It's like, yeah, that's their business. They don't make money by selling other people's games, right? They make money by selling other people's games on their platform.
They're the distributors, right? Which is something I want to touch on in a little bit.
Sure.
Is how that current setup in this generation of gaming, I think, is the base of a lot of the problems, especially like the microtransaction argument. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we want to go into it right now, but again, that's like I have a pretty good amount of ammo on that one. I mean, yeah. What else do you want to say on the fact that, again, that guy he put it in writing, like he can't. And then the fact that he put the amount of time that he was aware of it prior to release, I think that just negated his argument altogether.
Yeah, I look at it like this. If my family, he said enough, right? Because they did have a disclaimer. But if my family, I knew my family members were going to be buying our game, right? We're making a game. If I knew for sure that my family was going to buy that game and wouldn't be able to play it, whether now or in the future, I would do everything in my power to let them know, guys, the game is for sale and I cannot prevent you from buying it, but I need you to know you're not going to be able to play it. It wouldn't just be a random little disclaimer somewhere on a Steam page or whatever. I'd be making social media posts about this nonstop. If my, the big bad guy was actually whoever our publisher was, I would make it known left, right, and sideways, because I wouldn't want to feel responsible for people I care about, spending money that is going into a sinkhole. And if I would make that known heavily, consistently, and well before they were buying the game. And that's someone that cares about you. I'm not saying they don't care about their fan base. They clearly do, right? But I'm going to use the phrase I used earlier. It's a lot more meaningful when you say all this stuff and you try to, say what we can do about it before the money's in your pocket. It's just not as believable after the fact for me.
I agree. Like, that's why I brought up the timeline, because when we first started, I kind of felt the other way around, where I was thinking of the big bad guy and how they're not necessarily like being fair about this or whatever. But when you did that research and pointed out like this wasn't something that was just new, because that's the way that I took it when I saw the articles start popping up, is that the community was unaware of it or the developers were unaware of it. So when it started to happen, that's why there was such a strong backlash.
Mm-hmm.
But when you point out that there's that much time, I think that's just what's the phrase? Feigning ignorance.
Yeah.
And it backfired.
Half a year to put it in perspective, right? People have timeline, where our timeline for our game is 2 years. So we're saying for a quarter of our entire development cycle, we'd be aware of a problem. And Helldivers 2, let's say it took 5 years. Actually, I would love to Google this, but I don't want to spend the time. it's not like a 10-year in the making game. So even if it is several years, half a year is a massive chunk of time, no matter how you look at it.
Yeah. So touching on that again, as far as a developer being aware of certain things and a constant problem with like the community and the community feeling like the developers don't care. There's a big example, and that's Apex, Respawn, and EA. And if you look at it, a lot of the times the community, especially in Apex, blames Respawn for their inability to fix certain non-stop issues and how they should be upgrading their servers and a bunch of other things. So when I did the research on it, EA purchased Respawn in 2017. Let me see the numbers for that. EA Electric Arts required the company for 151 million in cash and up to 164 million in equity.
Okay.
Just to give the baseline on that. So when you look at how much, let me have the other number. Here we go. Okay, so EA as a company pulls in $1 billion a year. Respawn pulls in per year $22 million. So when you think about that and the way that it's set up, you're thinking, well, Respawn is getting all this money and they're not paying attention, and then they keep just doing all this stuff to the community. But when you actually look at the numbers and you look at the paper trail of stuff, it's the distribution and the parent company. So yes, they're the developers and their name is in the game, but it's technically now EA's game. And it's an example of how the current realm of things, they try to present it like it's the developer's issue.
Right.
But in all reality, if you look at those numbers, the developer is tiny compared to
by comparison,
22 million a year compared to $1 billion.
I want to segue just for a moment because I want to make sure Crystal feels heard here. She did respond to us earlier about the estimate was a bit over 7 years. Apparently 7 years, 11 months, 26 days. The 26 days part is important to create Helldivers 2. So 7 years or almost 8 years, right? Let's just call it 8 years. That is a very long time. It's actually pretty close to the decade mark. So I'll just leave off with 7 years times 2 is still 14. So 1/14 of their runway, they knew about this. And I still think that that's plenty of time to make a big stink about it before it's a problem. And really, if you think about it this way, well, I just realized, I'm sorry. It's not just the half year before. It's the half year before and then 6 months thereafter, right? That's a year for them to try to make good on their contract without all the pieces falling through and making people, aware and all that stuff. We spent enough time talking about it, but I did want to make sure I addressed her message there.
No,
I probably derailed you. Sorry.
No, you're good. But again, it's the topic of how can these smaller developers maintain their, I'm trying to think of the word.
Yeah, because it's their game reputation. It's their game, even if they don't have the say.
So that's where it becomes that argument of where you have like the PSN to this company, and the PSN is saying, well, to use our platform, you have to do A, B, and C.
Yeah.
So it's essentially like, how do you not sell your soul as a developer, which is something to look at as being indie developers, is how can we compete with that? And then again, looking at the numbers between Respawn's annual income to EA's, where you could develop this amazing game, but you're not going to be that Minecraft of like the one in how many that can do it on their own and then eventually say, you can have my game.
Right. And get bought out.
Yeah.
And literally bought out though, not kind of like owned and manipulated.
Because they were like, Respawn was bought for what would be the equivalent of what? How many years of their annual income? Because again, they make 22 a year and they got bought for 160, let's say.
Right. So well over 5 times their annual income.
And then they kind of go, okay, well, you bought us out, so now it's your game, but our name is still on it. So how is it like? It also makes the argument as a gamer yourself, because we look at games, we play games. How can we feel like we're being heard when it's just a cash machine to a lot of these companies? And I think like this review bombing thing and things like that are again a tool, but I don't know if it's the healthiest way to make the argument.
Yeah, that's kind of what led me to my relatively strong opinion, and you just touched on it. Crystal says, by the way, the only way to do that is just not sell your game, since money doesn't make a good game. And she's right. Money doesn't make a good game. And that's actually a really good topic we can dive into separately. She might be being tongue in cheek here, but there is a lot to be said about people making stellar games with relatively small amounts of resources. And that a lot of really good games, the more money that has been put towards them, especially during purchases, like you're saying, Joe, kind of like the worse the reputation gets.
Halo.
Yeah, Halo. Yeah, that's a good one.
I mean, you have a massive success of a game, and then they get bought out by Microsoft, and then Microsoft says, okay, well, now another developer is going to take over that title.
Yeah.
So when this generation looks at Halo, they're looking at 343's Halo. I grew up with Bungie's Halo. You mentioned Bungie.
When you said 343, I was like, what are you talking about?
343 is a developer, you see, because again, I followed that game from the beginning. So when you say Bungie now, it goes to Destiny. So you get this, where does it stop and end?
Yeah. I will say, maybe I'll bite my tongue in the future. Hopefully, if I do, it's the far future. But Supergiant Games, I think, is one of the few people that didn't go the Minecraft route, but is an indie developer that just, they can almost do no wrong. They're the developers of Hades 2, which is in testing beta. Transistor.
Very good reviews, by the way.
Right. Bastion. Yeah, I saw a couple articles. Concerned Ape is another good example with Stardew Valley. I was thinking of. Crystal mentioned that just now. And these are recurring names that you'll hear on our podcast if you've been listening to more than one, because these are the people that do what we want to do, and they did it well, and they consistently do it well. They're not receiving backlash. They're not getting bought out and then changing their business model, and they're consistent with the games that come out. Larian Studios, Crystal just typed in another excellent example.
When you I was going to bring up Larian earlier. And they stood their ground as far as Baldur's Gate, but they essentially lost Boulder because of it.
Oh, like they disagreed with a business decision and thus are taken off of the next iteration of Baldur's Gate. Mm-hmm. See, I respect that. And it's hard to imagine that negatively affecting their reputation. And some other major company out there, first of all, Larian isn't tiny, but someone's going to pick them up, and a big name is going to do the same thing that they already did with Baldur's Gate 3, and they're going to succeed again. So yes, I agree that they kind of shot themselves in the foot, but I think it was the right decision because they've always done well in the gaming industry.
Yeah, when I say that they paid for it, I don't mean to cut you off. It's that they lost it, but I don't necessarily think that they lost in the end. They just lost in that moment, in the sense of, well, we're taking this from you.
Yeah.
But I think it's a great sign that a company stood on their principles. And even, I believe it was a CEO, when they got an award, made a statement during the acceptance speech. So again, they stood on their principles, which I like to see. It's just rare.
Yeah. And even at the beginning of this conversation, despite my relatively critical and cynical view of Pilestad's response and his foreknowledge, it worked, right? And they are in sync as a whole, regardless of whether I think that they should take more blame or not. The community agrees with them. They're doing what they can to recommend action to the community, and the action resulted in a positive net gain for the gaming community. So I have to hand it to them there, right? They gambled, they won their gamble, great. And that's what the gaming community wanted to see. So all of these examples are really good developers that are sticking to their guns, right, wrong, or otherwise, and for the most part making the gaming community better than it was prior to these various events or various games coming out. I can't actually see our record time, so I want to make sure we don't push too far over.
We're right on it.
Okay. Today's piece was a lot more opinionated. I got a little riled up there, so I apologize. Anyone that knows me as a person, I'm very big on taking responsibility. And if you can perceive something that's going to happen, it's your responsibility to do everything in your power to make sure that things pan out as best as they can, right? Did you have any final thoughts about not just what's happening with Helldivers 2, but about this notion of developers being in an arena where we're responsible for the views that gamers have, not just for what we do?
I think it just makes people very aware that it is a community. And when you're a part of a community in any regard, you have to be aware of how things are perceived. And it could be very positive or it could be very negative. But I think the gaming community is learning to get their voice, like I said earlier. And I think the open communication needs to continue. Because there are examples of other games where they just don't care or they don't take the time to truly listen to the community, and it hurts the community. And some of these games that could be long-lasting games, and I'm talking the 5-10 year benchmarks, fade off because they just don't listen to what is being said.
Yeah.
And I think that's the key a little bit.
Agreed entirely. So much so that last sentence could be turned into a whole podcast. So Crystal mentioned, just to make sure we're representing her today, sorry, she's not feeling well. We didn't explain that. We were just like, she's in the background. She's under the weather, so her voice is pretty much gone. So one of the things she said while we were speaking was, I think she's talking about Larian. It's a gaming company that cares about the game, not money. Yeah. And then she just affirmed yes. So that is who she was talking about. So thank you guys very much. This has been another episode with Owl Knights Media doing Gaming at the Round Table podcast. We appreciate you tuning in, and we look forward to next week with you.
Catch you later.
Bye-bye.